Welcome to Accounting Life with Jotham Tai, a space where we'll talk about anything and everything surrounding the people that grind through your month-end accounting close.
Hi everyone. Today's episode is Perspectives on Accounting Tech and State of the Profession. Our guest today is Michael Kelly, Director of Accounting at Turo. On this episode, we talk about the impact of economic conditions on tech investment, 4 components of investing in new technology, and the looming talent shortage in accounting. Now, I'll hand it over to our host, Gapify CEO, Jotham Tai.
Hey, Mike, how's it going? Thanks for joining us on today's Accounting Live podcast. How are you today?
Great. Happy to be here.
I'm always excited to talk to my fellow accountants in the industry. They have kept me in this Gapify cave for too long, and sometimes I just need to get out and ask leaders like you, what they're seeing in today's market. And before I get into all of that, for the audience's sake, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a quick overview of you and your background and your role today at Turo.
Yeah, sounds good. So I'm the Director of Accounting at Turo. Obviously not where I started my career. I grew up in Vancouver, Canada. I went to school there. I had a degree in business, and ultimately I was hired when I finished my degree in business with a focus in accounting. I got hired at PwC. So in my 4th year, I had this window of time before joining public practice. In that time, I got accepted to do a paid master's in Saskatoon, which is in the middle of Canada. So when I was in Vancouver, did my articling at PwC for 4.5, 5 years, and then at the same time was doing a CA designation through the Masters of Professional Accounting program, and then ultimately came out of PwC about 5 years with a CA, CPA designation and a master's, and really focusing on insurance and assurance for lots of large private companies in Canada, manufacturing clients, aerospace clients. That was really my primary focus. And as a part of that, I got out of PwC and joined one of my clients called Sunridge Fresh Foods, where I was the controller of their manufacturing entities. And they were a North American manufacturer. So that was exciting. I got to join them. I was there for 2 years. And ultimately, I learned a ton in that role, going from being in public practice now into being in industry and seeing everything from the ground, which I'm sure most accountants that have come out of Big Four realize that can be a pretty big transition in. Going from auditing the work to actually doing the work is a completely different skill set. And I remember sitting there one day as the controller having to work with my GL accountants, like, how do you actually post a journal entry? Mm-hmm. So that was an interesting learning experience going through that. Ultimately, after what's that?
Quick testimonial there too. When I made the switch myself, not only how to do journal entries, but the concept of reversing journal entries was not something I understood well in assurance. It wasn't until the other side where I understood why it was important. And it's just very fascinating how much you think you know coming out of audit. But when you go on the other side, it's a totally different game, right?
Yeah, completely different. And I imagine if I was to ever go back into audit, how much stronger I would actually be having the experience in industry. But, typically most people don't go that direction. So I was at the manufacturing company for 2 years. It was a fantastic experience. And then really having the CA designation in Canada is really great because you can work abroad in the US, you can work in the United Kingdom. When I was at PwC, my wife and I had both been accepted to do a secondment with PwC. She went to New York, I went to Los Angeles. So as part of that, I had a little taste of working in the United States and what that was like. And so I think when we came home after working in industry for 2 years, we decided, we want to go back down to the United States because that's where, all the action is. When I think about companies in Vancouver, they're growing pretty modestly, very traditional growth. I have an idea, I'm going to go to the bank, I'm going to get a loan, I'm going to figure out the business, and I'm going to grow very casually, 2-3% per year. But really down in the Bay Area, companies are venture backed, they're getting $100 million paychecks, and they're going through hyper growth. So I'd never actually heard this term hyper growth before. So we came down to the US. I quit my job. I didn't have a job. Recruiters in California basically wouldn't talk to me unless I was in California. So I decided to just pack up and drive to California, and I started knocking on doors essentially, and had interviews and offers from small, medium, and large companies, small tech companies, all the way up to Google, and then I ultimately settled on a medium-sized company that ticked a lot of the boxes for me, which was Sunbasket. And they were private, pre-IPO, hyper growth, opening facilities across the US, sort of a new trendy business in the US. So there was a lot of interesting products they were rolling out. And I like to build. And so a lot of that was really appealing to me in terms of getting into a company like that, as opposed to being in a super large public company with a lot of restrictions, a lot of bureaucracy. It was really, I wanted to get in, I wanted to experience the hyper growth and go through that. So I was at Sunbasket for 2 years, and it was a roller coaster. You may have heard of them. Our biggest competitor was Blue Apron, but they grew from 0 to 375 million in revenue in a matter of 3 years. So it was an absolute roller coaster, just hanging on those full 2 years. Ultimately, I decided to leave there and come to Turo, and that's where I've been for the last 4 years.
Turo is an amazing company. I am definitely a long time and happy customer. It's just such a great model, disruptive to a very painful activity when you're at an airport and don't want to go through the hassles of a long line, and all the logistics and the coordination required to just get a car to drive around. And I think your company and your technology does it really well. I do also want to comment on your experience. I mean, geez, it's an interesting and very inspiring story. So you kind of took the traditional path of going through audit, then you actually experienced manufacturing, right? So kind of the slower growth, non-hyper growth, I should say, type business, and then got to experience it in your last 2 places. And I think there is just something very unique about being able to build a team and also kind of build processes and kind of grow technologies that you use as tools around you, versus kind of just like pressing the button and going from one month end close to another. And I think a lot of us accountants, especially the next wave of accountants I know that are entering the profession, like that's the type of opportunities that they like. So just hearing that about your background is always very interesting. And if I can maybe double click on some of the points that you touched on there. I mean, you mentioned again, just like building around you. Obviously, there's teams, there's also technology. I think I shared with you before we hopped on this call, like I love doing these because I love hearing how people are thinking about technology. And in today's, there's a backdrop of the macro and, obviously being more cost efficient. How are you thinking about like balancing, technology investments, but being prudent with spend at the same time at Turo?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it is interesting. It's such a large component of my day-to-day job, really, the last 6 years. And it's not something in the CPA profession that's necessarily well trained, that I would say. And maybe we can touch on that maybe a little bit later. But, when you're going through school and you're studying and you're learning, or you're going through your articling, you're not really learning about systems necessarily and how to implement them and all the nuances that go into doing that. So it really, when you get into industry, you really have to figure that out. It becomes a massive part of your day-to-day job, especially as a tech company that's growing and trying to go towards a public offering. Is systems become just so critical. So in terms of your question about how we balance sort of the macroeconomic conditions today with investing in technology, I would say, the assumption in your question here is that we don't have an unlimited budget. If we had an unlimited budget, we could buy every system, hire every contractor to help us do that. But that's obviously not going to help us scale responsibly as a company that wants to go down that path and of becoming a public company, balancing your revenue with your profitability. So really, when I think about investing in technology, there's sort of 4 components. Is you need to have the vision to be able to do it. There needs to be a return on investment in that technology. There has to be budgetary approval. I think that's sort of the main hurdle. And then the final point is really around your leadership. So I can touch on each of those points individually, but with the vision, it's really critical to have leaders on the accounting team or throughout the organization that really understand the business of what you're doing. So on your day-to-day accounting, how are we doing things? What are the problems? What are the bottlenecks and the challenges? So it's very, looking backwards, and then investing in technology is very looking forward. So you're trying to balance looking backwards, how we do things, and then having the vision to look forward to figure out how can we do this more efficiently more efficiently, increase the accuracy of what we do, improve our controls. Those are really like the three things I look at when I'm doing anything in accounting. And, it does take a certain leader to be able to step up and have that vision. Nobody's going to come to me and say, hey, do you want to implement this $100,000 system? Typically, it doesn't work like that. You have to have the vision to be able to bring that forward and create a proposal for executive management that they're going to look at this and say, this makes absolute sense. And then I think that really goes into point number 2, which is the return on investment, right? And in my experience, there has to be an ROI on these tools. Once again, if I go to management and I say, I've got this $100,000 tool, and it may work, it may not work, this is the purpose, I mean, they're going to say no immediately because, as a responsible FP&A team, that's really their job, right? So as we're investing these tools, really looking for ROI on these products, and that can be quantitative, it can be qualitative. Most likely it should really be both, but there needs to be a way that you can quantify this for management to say this is what the outcome will be if we implement this tool. And then budgetary approval, I think, is super important, but it has to be in the budget. And so when we think about macroeconomic conditions, the budget is what really is going to drive a lot of things. Executive management is meeting with FP&A and the CFO. They're creating this sort of high-level view of the organization and the direction we're heading, allocating budgets. And then as part of that, they're meeting with the individual teams to figure out what do you need to meet these objectives and these goals. And so this is where the vision and the ROI and the proposals come forward, where I would meet with them and say, this is what we want to do, and then try to get it approved through the budget. So I think that's pretty standard in terms of the process. And then I would say really the fourth point is leadership of the company. I think, I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of candidates. This week, I just interviewed somebody that said, I'm leaving my company because they brought me on to invest in technology and revamp systems, but then they didn't approve any of the systems, and I've been there 3 years. So, why is there such a disconnect there? And I think about it really boils down to the tone at the top of the company and the leadership. And when I think about that, really, what is that? Well, the company has goals and aspirations to continue to grow, move into new markets, handle acquisitions. And if the company has those kind of lofty aspirations and goals, those will filter down through the organization. And I think there's a recognition that collectively you need these kind of tools in order to succeed moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, those are great points. And a couple things I'll comment on. One is what you described as a methodology, and in terms of adopting a philosophy for systems acquisition. And it's not, in other words, just as easy as, oh yeah, you know what, we heard about something, so let's check it out. If it sounds like you have structure and a vision that that governs the process, and of course you do your homework on ROI, there's a very methodical way of approaching this, not just, and I think historically, truth be told, in our profession and industry, I'm guessing there's just a lot of ad hoc like investing, and in this type of environment, you don't have that approach is not going to be as effective as if you were proactive about aligning your organization's vision around technology, being able to have quantitative metrics on return. In a world, again, like where there's no unlimited budget concept now, that's all important. So I'm glad you're sharing this with our audience, because I do think a lot of the process that we are around is pretty casual. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that.
I would just add to that too, that resources are critically important to this whole process, and there's an evolution here throughout the business. Is you can't implement every system because you need strong teams to be able to implement them, to manage them, to fix issues and integration problems. All of these things, you can't just implement every system. So I get emails on a daily basis from people saying, come check out our system, check out whatever we're doing today, AI, bots. And, all of these things look great, but they need to fit on the roadmap because we have limited resources on our team, across the cross-functional teams as well. So resources is critical to this as well.
Yeah, and the resource to determine the resourcing required.
Yes, and then hiring that resource, etc.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, there is, and I think it loops back. One important point that this should loop back to is we're not really groomed to do this, right? You kind of have to figure out what this methodology looks like. Although I would think there's a standard best practice involved here, and I know I've done some webinars on tips and pointers, but I think a lot of this should really be developed early on in our careers, should be part of like even college curriculum and perhaps even the CPA exam. I think the only types of classes I remember, this was a long time ago, in college were, how to use Peachtree, but that is not the same as like how to, build an ERP ecosystem. And yeah, I think,
Yeah, how Workato like automates scripts across all your platforms. Like they don't teach you that in school.
right. Right. The only system I touched in school, like, was Peachtree. And yeah, I mean, I went to the enterprise, so that did me absolutely no good. Um, so yeah, this actually touches on a theme that I wanted to ask you about, as we've got a few more minutes here, but it's such an important topic, and I wanted to make sure I hear your perspectives on it. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about people leaving the profession, and college students not going into the profession. We're hearing different flavors. I think there's a technology, and of course, like being a technology provider on my side, maybe see the world a little differently, but I do think that there's so much frustration with manual work, and there's not enough leveraging of technology, or not enough opportunities to learn about technology in the profession. I see that as a reason why people are being driven away from the profession. But again, I'm more on the provider side. I wanted to ask you, like, are you hearing the same buzz in your network and circles, or do you see it differently?
No, I mean, I absolutely see this. I read the article recently in the last 2 weeks. Business Insider came out with saying basically there's a huge risk in the financial industry right now because of the lack of people going in to get their CPAs and going into the accounting profession. So I've definitely read about this. And, anecdotally being down in Silicon Valley for the last 6 years, I've experienced it firsthand. I've been on the hiring team for 40 to 50 roles. I've interviewed probably more than 500 people. I've looked at thousands of resumes, and it's definitely been a challenge, especially coming from Canada, where, in Canada, the CPA designation is almost seen as quite a prestigious designation to get. You get the CPA designation, and people don't let it expire. So in Canada, if you have a CPA designation, if it expires, you have to go through the whole training all over again. And in addition to that, companies are hiring CPAs that have an active license, not expired. Whereas when I came down to the US, I think it's a little bit different in terms of the value around the CPA designation. Is a lot of people have expired CPAs. They don't keep them active because it's easy to reactivate it. You just have to repay the fee. So there's not really an incentive to keep it active. And then I see a lot of candidates coming through that were in Big Four public practice. This could be E&Y, PwC, KPMG, Deloitte. And, they were there for one busy season. So they were there for 8 months and then they got out. And so they're really missing out on two things. One, they didn't get their CPA. So you have a lot of candidates coming out that don't have a CPA. And then you have a lot of candidates that sort of miss out on that Big Four exponential learning that happens over 1 to 5 years. And it sort of, you continue to learn after 5 years, but it sort of tapers after 5 years. So the question is, who are all the people in the accounting profession right now? There's a lot where they maybe don't have CPAs. And I guess I keep mentioning CPA and as that being sort of the pinnacle standard, but from my perspective, it really is, because it's the financial training to go into accounting that gives you that baseline or that foundational training to be able to look at problems and understand how to solve them. And so I think the CPA designation is still a highly valued designation when I'm looking at hiring. But definitely, I see it. It's very difficult to hire. When I was down here pre-COVID, it was super competitive in Silicon Valley to hire people. They were only hiring in South Silicon Valley. There was none of this remote work, people all over the country, all over the world. So you had a limited talent pool, tons of good companies with really competitive offers. So it was, at that time, it seemed like it was just a really competitive market. But in actuality, looking back, it seems like there is a shortage of people that are coming into the profession with experience or with CPA or with Big Four background that really sets your company up for success.
Yeah, and in my own network and the peers that are involved in kind of the recruiting side of the house, it's still the same situation, despite what we've seen in the market the last couple of quarters. And the shortage has not, well, the shortage has superseded the even the big layoffs that are happening in Silicon Valley and tech. I mean, there's still accountants not enough accountants out there, and it doesn't seem like a problem, unfortunately, that's going to get any better anytime soon, which is why it's created so much stir for good reason in the industry. And yeah, definitely helpful to hear your perspectives on that.
Yeah, and I would just add one or two other things here that, at Turo, we do have an amazing team. So we do have a really solid team of people with all varying levels of experience. So that's been amazing. It has been difficult. Like I said, you have to really work hard to recruit. But yeah, we have a really solid team at Turo.
Yeah, and I've seen, and I've been around several at this point between consulting, audit, and now my capacity at Gapify, I've been around a lot of different teams, and the ones that have really strong culture, which I know you guys do have at Turo, that is so critical in driving engagement and keeping people very motivated to grow themselves within the accounting profession. It starts with culture, right? It's back in the day when I went into the profession, you were just expected to produce and deliver, and we were very disciplined. And I've used the word military before. I know it's kind of like the mindset, but that doesn't work in this type of environment anymore. And strong cultures are critical to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Mike, I made a promise to our producers to add a new segment to these podcasts called Rapid Fire. I think it's called Rapid Fire Questions. You're going to be the first person that goes through this, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And it may or may not have any kind of links to accounting. The first one, and these are questions that the producers shared with me. I'll just go in order here. What is one book you'd recommend?
I have a lot of favorite books, but I would have to say the most impactful book that I've read in the last year has to be 12 Hours by 12 Weeks by Susie Giordano. I have a newborn. He just turned 1 last month. And this is a sleep training book. I read this and it has been an absolute game changer. So nothing to do with accounting, but this book has been incredible. I highly recommend to any new parents.
Awesome recommendation, and congrats on your son's first month birthday.
Thank you.
If you were not an accountant, you'd be a blank.
Growing up as a kid, my favorite movie was Indiana Jones. So if I could go back in time, I'd be an archaeologist.
Oh yeah. Like National Treasure and Nick Cage too, along those lines.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. And last one here for you, Mike. What was your first job?
First job was reffing hockey and umpiring baseball at 12 years old.
Oh, wow. I guess I'll piggyback off of that. Favorite hockey and baseball teams?
Favorite hockey team has to be the Vancouver Canucks for sure, because that's where I'm from. Favorite baseball team probably has to be, I like the Toronto Blue Jays because I'm Canadian and they're the only Canadian team, but I'll go with the Mariners because they were closer and that's who I grew up watching.
Wow. I should have known that. Yeah, you mentioned you're from Vancouver before we hopped on, and asking someone from Vancouver what their favorite hockey team, I cannot, there's no other right answer outside of the Canucks.
I'm not going to say Chicago, that's for sure. Or Boston.
Fair enough. Well, Mike, I appreciate you joining us on today's podcast. We definitely love talking about, obviously, what's happening as it relates to technology and how businesses like Turo is growing. We'd love to have you back sometime and maybe expand on some of these topics here. But in the meantime, thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for stopping by. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you want more information, please check us out at gapify.com, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.